live on YouTube. And there we go. Welcome, everybody. So we have Bruce Rawles and Lynn Johnson, and we are reading Absence from Felicity, the story of let me check this before it starts. The
Helen
story
Schuckman.
of the scribing of A Course in Miracles with Helen Schuckman. And Ken Wapnick is the author. And we we're moving quite right along now, Bruce. We are actually into some of these descriptions of some of the different things that uh, Helen had taken down,
The
but never,
supplements. Yep.
yeah, never the supplements. Took them
Mhm.
down, but never shared them. Uh, she just put them in. And so I guess, I guess I'm right to some extent, because I always say that the guys who go and try to publish everything that Helen ever jotted down on a notepad, they went and, dug through her underwear drawer to find notes. They were so eager to find something else that Jesus might have said that would somehow or the other change. I don't know if the idea is that it would change what he's asking us to do in the course that's published.
Yeah, I
Because
think we've got my assessment is if we actually were to take what's written in the course, which is plenty of pages worth, and apply it fully, that would keep us busy through, well, it's certainly gonna keep me busy for the rest of this lifetime.
for the rest of this lifetime, yeah.
And
Well,
probably and maybe a few others, I don't know.
I
Maybe
mean,
I'll
maybe they're
it'll
hoping that
click
there's
before
some
then.
instruction that's like, oh, by the way, you can bypass all this stuff if you just do XYZ right now, or who
Yeah.
knows?
And Ken Wapnick says the shortcut to the course is that there is no shortcut.
Yep, there is no shortcut. That's right.
But the course itself is uh, the it basically doesn't make many claims, but it does claim to be a faster way back to where we never left. And it says it will save us time, and
Yeah.
I think that's really true.
Well,
I mean, it's the wisdom is distilled in the ideas and the pages that we're reading in the course are so concentrated and so undistorted and pristine in terms of their content that I don't think there's any shortage of inspiration there
yeah,
and insight.
no. I think if we just did the very bare minimum that's being asked in the course, which is what I've been doing all along, I guess, and even not that to some extent, but it actually does shift everything. It
Yeah,
shifts my world. It shifts everything. So, yeah, this is there's plenty of stuff here. So, but here's some more. So,
yeah, yeah. Should I start
uh,
reading the next section?
yeah, sure.
Okay. I have us on the bottom of page 389 in the print version that I have in front of me. And looking at your screen that you're sharing, I see we're about 76% of the way through. And page 375 of 492 in your digital version. So this section within chapter 14 is psychotherapy, purpose, process, and practice. And it was scribed during 1973 and 1975. Ken begins with, one day in the fall of 1973, I asked Helen if there were any anything else she had taken down. Oh, yes, she said casually. There are some pages on psychotherapy. I then learned that these notes had been taken down from Jesus in January 1973 in the same manner as was A Course in Miracles. It was obviously incomplete, only going so far as the bottom of page 13 in the published pamphlet, Psychotherapy, Purpose, Process, and Practice. That pause there was because I turned the page to 390. I could not wait to read the notes, and upon doing so, very disappointedly said to Helen, "But this is just like the course," not really paying attention to what I was saying. What
That's
else
funny.
would
It's
I?
like he was expecting something more too.
Well, in some of his talks, he says he thought, well, maybe there'd be something specific for people in the psychotherapy profession, and
Right.
that realm of practice and study. But basically, it does use words that have the form of that, but the content's still the same. It's like how could if there's if it's so simple, how could the content be any different? If pure non-duality is the ultimate in simplicity, how could a course on non-duality, pure non-duality, be any more simple than it already is? Yeah. So
Yeah.
Ken goes on. I was probably, oh, but this is just like the course, not really paying attention to what I was saying. What else would I have thought this would be like? I was probably expecting something more specific, but a few more readings made it clear how perfect the pamphlet was, even in its incomplete form, in reflecting the application of the course's principles of healing to psychotherapy. From time to time, I reminded Helen of the unfinished manuscript, but to no avail. And then in January 1975, while we were completing our editing of A Course in Miracles, Bill ran across a notice in the newsletter of the Association for Transpersonal Psychology. It was placed by John Mundy, a traditional Methodist minister whom Helen and Bill heard speak a few years earlier at a Spiritual Frontiers Fellowship conference held in the South. John was a young man whose enthusiastic spiritual fervor had impressed Helen and Bill. In his note in the newsletter, John stated that he was doing a doctoral dissertation on spiritual psychotherapy and was requesting any articles, books, or information from the transpersonal community that would be relevant for his study. Bill quickly called our attention to it, and I think it might have been, and I think I might have been the one who said to Helen that this would be a wonderful opportunity to, in Bill's wonderful expression, stone two birds. That's good. Uh, in other words, this would be the necessary stimulus to complete the psychotherapy pamphlet, as well as being an answer to the call for help. So Helen called John, who was living in New York City, and made a date for him to meet us one evening at my apartment. Helen told him she thought she would have something that would be of interest to him. The meeting took place as scheduled, and we were joined there by Father Michael, who was interested in seeing how we presented the course to others, at that point a very rare event. To this day, I'm not sure if John has entirely gotten over that fateful evening. Poor man. John and I subsequently became friends, and he frequently has remarked to me that he had no idea what he should have expected from this meeting, and certainly had no idea of the impact that evening would have on his life. Well, I think a bunch of us, including you, especially you, right, Lynn? No.
Yeah.
Actually, there was, of course, no way John could have expected what he received. Interestingly enough, he had no clue as to why Helen had called him, since he had totally forgotten about the notice which he had placed months before. Besides, he had no current plans for doing his dissertation on spiritual psychotherapy.
That's
None,
hilarious.
yeah, really. Nonetheless, John's notice provided the needed stimulus to Helen, who picked up the uncompleted manuscript where she had left off 2 years previously, and finally finished it in March. The pamphlet, again, is a wonderful summary of the course's principles of healing as specifically applied to the practice of psychotherapy, which essentially consists of two people joining together in the name of Christ. Helen felt little connection to the pamphlet, as I remember, although I always felt very close to it. I believe that its call for, quote, special training, unquote, of therapists, page 18, was something I would be responding to in the future.
So
Okay,
thank you. Yeah.
sure. And
Um,
then I'm looking up at the screen and seeing in your digital version, they've got a more up-to-date reference, which is um, psychotherapy, section 3, sub part 3, section 2, paragraph 2, sentence 2, which is the special training therapists. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah. Oh, yeah. And I wondered about that because you had referenced something on the other page that wasn't on my particular version, but it was a page number or something. Anyway, but this is, we just went through the psychotherapy pamphlet. Yeah, I don't. I think you probably know on Thursday evenings we do a deep dive into different parts of the course, and we've been doing the supplemental pamphlets for a long time.
Uh-huh.
And we just went through the psychotherapy, and now we're in the Song of Prayer. Uh, but it really, and of course, it is really just the course in a more expanded point of view. Um, but it really, I think it really takes it would be helpful for people that are not even, in fact, he talks to us as if we are the therapists, which is really what it is the truth is that, you don't have to be a licensed psychotherapist or whatever to read or practice this, because it's practicing the course in its most fundamental way. And so I'm really, really grateful for that. But I'm also I know I have read I know John and talk to him fairly frequently,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
we I've read his autobiography, Missouri Mystic, and it's just interesting to
Hmm.
see uh, from the point of view of Ken, who was like from a different, obviously different perspective, um, of this coming together of John with Helen, who became later basically his mentor.
Hmm.
Um, he was, and they really helped each other a lot, John and Helen, which is really pretty cool too.
Hmm.
But because she did kind of see him like an adopted son or something, and she gave him romance advice and such.
I seem to recall something about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean that there was it was a very they had a pretty close relationship, but it's just seeing it from this point of view is really cute. It's like, oh my gosh, that's John posted that. He didn't even remember he had posted that request, uh, nor would he have known that Ken would have seen that and said, "Hey, this is a good idea. Why don't you finish this thing?" It also gives me like a much clearer picture of Helen's ability to. It was Bill who said that, but it also gave me a good idea of Helen's ability to pick it up and start over, like in the middle, which she did brilliantly, because the psychotherapy pamphlet, the entire thing, is brilliantly coherent and absolutely doesn't seem like it was written years apart. It just seemed like she put the notebook down one day and picked it up the next.
Which kind of is a
So
testament to the clarity and consistency of her scribal process, and particularly the source that she was working with, which really just speaks volumes, literally and figuratively, about the consistency needed from all of us to learn how perfect oneness is consistent and in all of its seeming parts, right?
exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just wow.
Hmm.
I love it. All right. Do you want me to read now?
Sure, sure.
Okay. So the second one is a clarification of terms, which came about in 1975. And for me, the clarification of terms, uh, if 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 I had read that, anytime at any time before or after reading the rest of the course, it it is like the course itself. The clarification of terms is a much more succinct way of putting one thing uh, in adjacent to another, and you can make inferences between them. I mean, it's written in a really spectacular manner, I think. uh, I admire the clarification of terms, if that makes any sense,
Hmm.
because of how it is written. It's not written. It's not a straightforward. This is what this means. It's taking two different things and uh, putting them together. And when you put them together, even though they seem to be not related, the relationship of them is what actually is the meaning of the term. So I love it. It's brilliant. And if you haven't read the clarification of terms, it is one of the things that is still under copyright. And so the other versions of the course that have been published by other folks. other than the foundation. Um, I know Teddy in the Sparkly edition actually put it in as a preface, I think a preface or something, of the book, and so it's all like in a paragraph style. It's not like the term and then what this means. It's all written like as if it were a continuous uh, uh, document. And so, I mean, that's how he hid it in there because legally he couldn't publish it. And he'd already been sued by the foundation for having published it in the first place. So he didn't want to get sued again. So
Hmm.
he just sprinkled it in. It's either a preface. I can't find a sparkly right now. I've got a dozen of them here, but it's either a preface or but it's in the beginning of the book before the actual course uh, is written. So I thought that was, sneaky and clever.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'm not as up to speed in all the various alternate versions of the course, so
Yeah, no,
I've had
somebody
some of them
has,
from time to time, but they're no longer in my library.
yeah, and it's because I have had a personal relationship with Teddy, so
Uh-huh.
that's that's how. Anyway, so clarification of terms, 1975. On occasion, Helen and I had discussed the possibility of a glossary that would define some of the terms used by A Course in Miracles, but nothing ever came from our discussions. Then Judy Skutch raised the idea again, feeling that it would be of great help to her as well as others, especially in view of the course's very non-traditional usage of Christian terminology. Judy was very much an identified Jew whose father was a major figure in American and international Jewry. Helen and I then sat down and drew up a list of terms we thought might be helpful, knowing full well that this glossary, later to be called a clarification of terms, would not be written in that way. And of course, it was not. Helen took it down from September through the beginning of December 1975, well in time for its inclusion in the printed books. As Jesus instructed us to do, we placed it as an appendix to the Manual for Teachers. Its beautiful closing passage, incidentally, was written at the beginning of the Advent season and thus reflects the Christmas theme. The morning star, quote unquote, morning star, that is referred to at the end was taken from the final verses of the biblical book of Revelation and traditionally has come to be a symbol for Jesus. This short piece of 16 pages is a poetic gem and provides as well some useful additional information for students of the course. Its clarifications, however, will probably not be very helpful to people who do not already have some background in the Course in Miracles itself. There's a cute story associated with Helen's scribing of the clarification of terms, and one that fortunately has a happy ending. One afternoon, while we were all at the medical center, Helen was complaining to me once again about Jesus and this dictation, and even brought up her past gripes about how A Course in Miracle had imposed itself on her. She was not in the bitter state I had seen her in at other times, and so, having in front of me her notebook in which she was taking down the quote terms unquote, I took it in my hands. Reminiscent of my boyhood basketball days, I then tossed it unerringly across the office into the wastepaper basket. My memory is not that precise, but I believe I exclaimed something to the effect, "So much for Jesus in this damn course." And that was that. I think Bill walked in at that point, and Helen laughingly told Bill what had just happened. My memory again is a little vague, but I do know that we were then interrupted by something that distracted us totally from the notebook and Helen's complaints. Shortly afterwards, we left for the day. Early the next morning, Helen called me in a panic, asking me if I knew where her notebook was, both of us totally forgetting the previous afternoon's basketball shot. Helen's misplacing her notebook was not an uncommon occurrence, and as I was usually very good at finding it, I reassured Helen that I would be over right after my 7 a.m. patient and would find it for her. My patient soon arrived afterwards, and in the middle of the session, I suddenly remembered what had happened. But even before I had a chance to call Helen, she had remembered as well, and more probably at the same time, an already telephoned Bill who was racing up to the medical center in a cab, hoping to beat the garbage collectors to the office waste paper basket. He was too late, however. The garbage had already been collected, and the notebook now lay in one of about 2 or 3 dozen large plastic bags soon to be burned. Many of the bags, incidentally, oh my God, contained entrails of discarded experimental animals. And the reader may recall this was a research building. Bill prevailed upon the janitor to allow him access to the room and was fortunately guided to the right bag almost immediately, finding the notebook safe and sound and buried only in a mass of paper.
Yeah,
Wow.
I'd forgotten about this story. Yeah. I was thinking, gee, if it had gotten in the wrong bag, you know, someone might have explained, "Boy, I really hate your guts," when they found it
Oh, you're funny.
among the entrails, right?
Yeah, I know it's so funny because I had forgotten this too, but it reminded me of um, when I worked at Rocky Flats, which is the nuclear place. I I um, had they had gotten new management, and the management was like really big on if you had degrees of any type. And of course, I had several. So I was pretty, proudly bringing them in, and I was going to, put them up on the walls in my office. But while I was rearranging things, whatever, I set them on top of the garbage can. So these are, big. I know you know how diplomas come.
Uh-huh.
Put them in these big frames. So
Mhm.
there's these big frames uh, at that time there was three of them. So three of them, and I set them on top of the garbage can, and I forgot about it. And I came back to work in the morning, and they were gone, and they had come and thrown them away. But fortunately, the bin was right behind our building, and fortunately, it was they were right there in the first bag that I looked at, and I got them back. But when I read this story, I'm like, oh my God, did they get thrown away? Yes, they did. It did. And
It's
they were
funny.
able to get it
Parallel
back.
stories.
Yeah, wow. I laugh at it myself right now because thinking about those, I don't have those up on my wall here at the house. They're packed in a box somewhere. And you know, I what was so wonderful. I thought that was everybody thinks having a piece of paper is so wonderful. That's such an important thing. So, so anyway, that's a cute story about the uh, clarification of terms,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
and we have deep dived into the clarification of terms, and it's astounding, really, honestly. Um, it really is. I mean, it is just like the course. It is the same stuff. So, okay, how about the Song of Prayer? You want to read this?
Sure. Mm. Well, he's only got one paragraph on it.
Oh, good.
1977, Song of Prayer. The second and last pamphlet taken down by Helen is, quote, The Song of Prayer, Prayer, Forgiveness, Healing, end quote, which was scribed from September through November of 1977. I remember that year. So I just moved to Georgetown, California. I was building a geodesic dome. It is a beautiful summary of A Course in Miracles teachings on forgiveness and healing in the context of prayer. Though it contains no new ideas, it does introduce some different terminology, notably forgiveness to destroy. This is the false forgiveness the world has us hold out to each other, and which is described in several places in the Course itself, though never mentioned it or named as such. Even more important, however, the pamphlet addresses the meaning of prayer, including the issue of asking the Holy Spirit and what in fact we should be asking for. It was this issue that provided the stimulus for the pamphlet and was directly relevant to Helen's relationship with Jesus. I therefore will postpone further discussion of the circumstances of the pamphlet's writing and its contents until chapter 17, when I discuss in greater depth the figure of Jesus and Helen's relationship with him. Okay, well, that's good, because that was a pretty short paragraph for a
That's a
pretty
pretty short
significant
paragraph.
supplement. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know there's a significant story to it because there, we talked about it when we did we're actually in the deep dive right now in the Song of Prayer. And uh, talked about a lot that, and in fact, I think in the Never Forget to Laugh, Carol Howe talks about it, that
Mhm.
it was actually more of a response to people who were teaching the course who
Yep.
hadn't read the course.
Right. And who, even those who may have read it, were doing the New Age, level confusion number on it, and making it about, dream repair, basically.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So and
So.
it is brilliant.
Oh yeah. There's in both of those two supplements, there's one line that stands out for me, and in the psychotherapy one, the line is pamphlet. It's healing begins. I mean, I'm probably paraphrasing both a bit, but healing begins when the therapist forgets to judge the patient. I think
Yes,
that's such a wonderful reminder that it's what I think about everyone. That's what I need to look at and pay attention to. And then the one on the Song of Prayer, that sticks in my mind as the exemplary of the, the idea in it is um, that true prayer is to the secret of true prayer is to forget the things you think you need, which I think is so helpful.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, yeah, both of those, and the first one you mentioned is the first thing I think also,
Yeah.
and then the second one, because I mean, ever since I read that and got to understand that, that's if I'm the psychotherapist and everyone who I'm with is uh, there for my healing, for my blessing, then when I stop judging them I actually can help them.
Right.
And
Right. Another way of saying that is if I think I'm the psychotherapist, it's not going to work. But if I let the healing come through me from Jesus, Holy Spirit, the Christ mind, whatever non-ego symbol that's in my mind that I have access to, and everyone has access to, then healing, is inevitable as well as
yes,
possible. Yeah.
yes, and also because it goes really well with the nonviolent communication, which is communicating with the uh, lack of with no evaluation, no judgment,
Mm-hmm.
listening and talking with no judgment.
Yeah.
So yeah, it works. All right. So you want to read on since that was so
Sure, I'll read a little bit.
okay.
This next section is Special Messages 1975 to 1978. There also is the group of small messages Helen took down over a period of time that we came to refer to as, quote, special messages, unquote. In the main, these involved, quote, celestial pep talks, unquote, wherein Jesus offered us encouragement by guaranteeing a successful outcome to all things. Some of these even became quite specific as to when this success would or might come. None of these predictions, however, came to fruition, and on any kind of observable or experiential level, none of the positive, more general predictions came to pass either. The reader may recall here Helen's statement in her letters to Bill about recognizing that it was not a good thing for her to become involved with specifics in the future. And I think Ken emphasizes that in various places is in this book and as well as elsewhere. That when Helen was working with the pure non-dual message of the course, she was spot on, and when she tried to, apply it to specifics in the world, she was just as hit and miss as anyone, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and well, and a lot of times, uh, even in the course, Jesus says to us like things like, "Today you will see this. This will happen to you today.
Right.
Now, when you
And
do."
well, he's
And
he's speaking from eternity outside of time, so that
yeah,
it is today. Yeah.
it is today. So, but most people are like, "That didn't happen today," but they don't recognize that any kind of predictions that have to do with the future absolutely are. It's impossible to predict the future because it doesn't exist. It's like I mean, it's such an enigma, but there is no future. So for
Mhm.
Jesus to come in with some kind of future prediction, and and I'm not sure what these, but I guess we'll see more of what these messages are, because the one that I was reading to you last week that uh, Carol Howe had about Jesus talking about the resurrection and what happened with his body, that was a kind of a special message, but it made perfect sense to me. It didn't seem like it was saying anything that was not something I had already had in mind from reading the course. So anyway, I'll let you continue reading.
Okay. Helen's true self, from which she united with Jesus, existed in a dimension beyond time and space. It was from that self, with capital S, in which love united with itself, that A Course in Miracles originated. That's a very important statement there. It's not, wasn't from a lady in New York or any other place or time. From that state of mind, there can be no concern for specific outcomes or the times in which these outcomes would occur. That is why in A Course in Miracles itself, there is no mention of specific outcomes, the forms in which the content of forgiveness would be expressed. In fact, it says of itself, this is a course in cause, content, and not effect, form. And that's on page 432 in the edition of the text that uh, was published there. And then I'm looking at the screen here. That's chapter 21, section 7, paragraph 7, sentence 8. Such specifics are irrelevant to the atonement, which consists of only one outcome, which is as certain as God. And that's from page 52 in the text, which is chapter 4, section 2, paragraph 5, sentence 8. Okay. These special messages, therefore, while inspired in part, become contaminated by Helen's other self, which tried to help in a form she, uh, of course, that's lowercase, decided would be helpful. This is why Jesus taught, trust not your good intentions, they are not enough. And let's see, that's chapter 18, section 4, paragraph 2, the first two sentences. Okay. And why in the earlier works of the dictation, he was urging Helen to ask him first before she decided to be helpful to others. Thus, Bill and I came to feel that these messages were highly influenced by Helen's own need to be encouraged and to encourage others. This seemed to be especially the case again whenever the message became specific as to time, place, or person. Thus, we never felt that in the main, these had the same legitimacy or authenticity as did A Course in Miracles or the pamphlets, in none of which did it ever appear that Helen's ego had contaminated the information in any way. We realized that the same could not be said about these messages, and thus they have never been published. To borrow the language of the churches, we did not feel that they should be admitted to the scribal canon. Incidentally, it is important to note in this regard that all of these messages date from Judith Sketch's tongue twister, arrival on the scene and our discussions about publication, etc. As I shall discuss in chapter 17, this was the period when great emphasis was placed on receiving answers to specific questions, leading inevitably to a concern for what was going to happen in the future. The emphasis and concern was largely absent before, and we shall see later how this adversely affected Helen's hearing. Nonetheless, in a few of these messages, when they were more abstract, the authentic voice of Jesus seems quite manifest. We can find here still other examples of Jesus' attempts, not only to assuage Helen's fears, which was always a full-time job, but also to help her with specific forgiveness advice in the same manner as the original dictations in 1965. I cite some of these messages now. Do you want to pick up from there?
Sure.
Okay.
And this is all real interesting, that they could tell basically which of these things were coming from wishful thinking on Helen's part versus what her actual discussion with Jesus is. But I think it might be even more than that, because since none of us know what the outcome of anything is going to be, um, it could just as well have occurred in the way that was wished for. If that would have been what would have given the best lesson, that probably could very, I mean, we make our own reality.
Yeah,
We're the ones
yeah.
who are making this happen. So
Hmm.
if we need that to happen, it's going to happen. And
It also crossed my mind as you're saying that is in the kind of parallel universes, modern physics theory. If there's all these different permutations and branchings within our dualistic dreams, then maybe at the time when Helen was tuning into um, something that was specific, that might have reflected the state of the parallel universe that she was in in her split mind at that time.
right,
That
yeah,
might have been more accurate for that particular timeline or sphere of the dream or whatever. But I think that the point that Ken is making there and has attempted to convey throughout so much of his work is that the idea is not to become a great scholar and or a great predictor of what the dream is going to do or has done or is doing. It's just basically saying that the whole point of the course is to wake up from the dream rather than try to become master of it.
yes, 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 yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. So, all right. Well, I'll continue on and we'll get more elucidation as we go along.
Sounds good.
And speaking of elucidation, when they mentioned in the a few pages back about the morning star being Jesus, literally, I think the morning star is Lucifer. So, but they can switch it around however they like. But
And then I think in astronomy, isn't the morning star Mercury and Venus the evening star, or maybe
yeah, I
backwards or
think
so.
that's it. Yeah,
So
yeah.
so it all depends on who you talk to and what the phase of the moon is and all that good stuff, right?
Right. Yeah. And if you're
As
if
far as
you're a
symbols in
Scorpio
the
or
world. Yeah.
if you're a Libra or an Aquarius or
Yeah.
whatever.
It's
Yeah.
interesting. A little quick aside. You should probably know I have another website called geometrycode.com, and I, ever since high school, have been fascinated with geometric shapes and symbolism. And the more and more I studied over the years, I realized, well, there are some symbols that are kind of universal, and you can kind of argue that certain shapes and forms, have meaning that somewhat transcends cultural boundaries. And yet there's so many different ways to read those things within the dream that it's almost impossible to find much consistency in that because of the way egos like to interpret everything and interpret it in a dualistic way. And symbols are intrinsically dualistic. The course says that words are but symbols of symbols. So even if a geometric symbol were to be just a plain old symbol, not a symbol of a symbol, you still we still have to make sure we're using a non-dual uh, interpretation in order to really get what that symbol might mean. But even then, because it's a symbol, it can at best reflect some of the pure idea, right? If that makes any sense. I think, and that's why Ken says it's a very Platonic course, and we shouldn't confuse symbol with source. But the idea of symbols meaning certain things kind of was really evident to me. Another if I can extend this aside for another minute or two. Um, I was giving some talks on sacred geometry in Sedona, Arizona in 2004, and I drove down there with my new laptop, which gave me an excuse to buy a laptop the first time. And, and I had several hours worth of presentations all ready to go, and people seemed to enjoy them. And there was another lady there who had dozens, if not hundreds, of very specific geometric shapes and very specific thoughts and emotions that she ascribed to them. And a very lovely person, and you know, she was selling material that had all these symbols, you know, books and prints and things like that. And I stuck with what I had learned from Plato, that the five Platonic solids, um, tetrahedron for fire, uh, the cube for earth, the octahedron for air, the icosahedron for water, and the dodecahedron for spirit were the only ones that I even mentioned, and in passing, because you know Plato had basically associated those ideas, you know, those elemental ideas with those shapes. And I thought, well, there's some correspondence there, because you know probably the most fiery shape was the tetrahedron with the sharp points, and the most watery one was the icosahedron, which is most closely resembled a sphere. But aside, and the cube is, you know, we you know, solid as the earth, right? But you know, that was as far as I was willing to go. But I was thinking, well, even that, you know, you could take a lot of different ways, and it's subject to interpretation. So that's why I, you know, tended to kind of go with what was consistently true everywhere, rather than things that might have, you know, culturally very different meanings. Also, what comes to mind is, I think black means life in parts of the Orient, and it means death in other parts of the world. And you know, it's there's so many things that are so subjective, and you know, moving targets basically in terms of meaning. And that's why I think those early workbook lessons say, you know, we've given all the meaning, everything, all the meaning that it has. Well, yeah, and that's a, you know, a ever shifting landscape that's being gerrymandered by the ego constantly, and the political landscape is shifting, and the battle lines are being redrawn, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And yeah, you can interpret it any way you want. I mean, you can go outside and look at the stars and say, "Oh wow, that looks like a Big Dipper here, and this looks like a bear, or whatever."
Right, right.
We can interpret it any way we want, but in
It's a ladle,
reality,
it's a bear. Stop, you're both right. It's a ladle and a
yeah,
bear. Yeah.
it's what. But that's it. It's
It's a dessert topping and a floor wax.
That's right. But it's our interpretation of what things that are uh, millions of years away from each other. It's not even like they're in close proximity to each other.
Right, right.
It's only from this perspective that we see them that
Exactly.
way, and we give it a whole meaning, like
Of course.
a whole meaning. And the thing that's so beautiful about all of this is whatever meaning we give to that, that's what it is to us. And it
Hmm.
will act that way to us as well. This is, we're the ones that make up this story, and then our lives are based on the story we made up.
Dream
Uh,
interpretation, huh?
exactly. So wow, how powerful the mind is, and uh, how silly we are to believe it's stories, because I mean, seriously, uh, if you look at everything, you recognize, yes, when my mind is made up, there's nothing else that can be done.
And I think that phrase, "when your mind's made up," uh, occurred to me. The humor in that double entendre was when that a song came out by the was it Glenn Hansard and
Good
Rita
answer, yeah.
Glova, and they were the ones that were in the movie Once. And there was a song, I think it came out after the movie, but maybe it was from the movie. But it's called, the title of it and the lyrics is "When Your Mind's Made Up." And I was thinking, well, that describes everyone's ego perfectly, doesn't it? We
Yes.
made up an entire thought system, which was so powerful, it made up an entire universe of space and time, and we don't even question the 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 prison that we made, nor do we question the insane thought system that felt the need to to make it up in order to escape from an unfounded, unconscious guilt for an impossible crime, right? How crazy is that?
It's just it's well, you know what? It's not just crazy, it's funny, and you do have to laugh about it.
Exactly. And that's why the Holy Spirit basically is so humorous when you read it with that light going through the course. And it's like,
Yeah.
it's basically lampooning in the most gentle, patient, kind, non-mean-spirited way possible, and just saying, brother, you do believe this crazy stuff, Look, just
Yep.
take a look at it. And that's looking at it without running screaming from the room of your mind is what's gonna free you from that needless suffering, right?
Oh my God, yes. And all suffering is needless.
Yeah,
There
yeah.
is no need for suffering in any universe, any
Yep,
way.
yep.
Yeah, so we're just crazy. So so let me see. So we're talking about these uh notes and so he just said that a lot of the notes that she took down maybe had more to do with her own personal desire for things
Right.
to happen and
Yep.
and not necessarily from divine uh dictation. But we don't know, and I can't, I wouldn't be able to say that. Believe me, there's been plenty of times I've interpreted what a person has said, and oh yeah, you must not get this, or you must be thinking that, but really, it's none of my business. I'm not
Yeah.
in their mind, and any interpretation I'm going to have is going to be wrong. That's
Right.
guaranteed. I
And
guarantee.
that's the whole point, isn't it? Is if I can remember that if I let my ego misinterpret really everything, I'm never gonna be happy. But if I let Holy Spirit translate all the specifics, it's always going to take, what a dark thought, drag it out of the closet of my mind, sh heal it of its distortions and misperceptions, and see what truth is there, and that it'll always distill down to something equivalent to God's son is innocent, and tag, we're all God's son. Mm.
Yep,
We're all
yep,
we're all the
yeah.
same perfect oneness that had never left
Yeah.
the
So
source.
that is a shortcut.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
you just go from that, okay, whatever, I don't give a shit what it is. Whatever it is, you're innocent. You
yep,
know, nobody's guilty here. If you
yeah,
could just go to that, then anything that came after that would be meaningless.
right.
That it's just that's the simplicity of the course. It's not telling you how to think, it's telling you, how to see the reality of what you're doing so you don't make a fool out of yourself,
Hmm.
which is another thing. My mind's made up and I made a fool out of myself.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my
By the
Lord.
way, I'm going to be facilitating the session right after this, so I'll
Oh,
probably
okay.
leave a few minutes early today, but I think we have time to read another few more paragraphs.
Okay,
Do you want to go ahead?
sure. Yeah, okay.
Okay.
So, do you want to read or you want me to
Go
more?
ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. Okay. So, nonetheless, in a few of these messages, when they were more abstract, the authentic voice of Jesus seems quite manifest. We can find here still other examples of Jesus's attempts not only to assuage Helen's fears, which was always a full-time job, uh, but also to help her with specific forgiveness advice in the same manner as in the original dictations in 1965. I cite some of these messages now. Okay, so uh, the first of these antedates by 2 years the specific message on asking what became Helen's introduction to the Song of Prayer, which again we will discuss in a later chapter. The first message cautions Helen, but really all the world as well, against believing that simply our desire to hear is sufficient to truly hear. As we have just observed, trust not your good intentions. They are not enough. From text chapter 18, section 4, paragraph 2. Trust not your good intentions. They are not enough. October 5th, 1975. To God, all things are possible. This is one of the notes. To God, all things are possible, but you must ask his answer only of himself. Perhaps you think you do, but be you sure that if you did, you would be quiet now and wholly, wholly undismayed by anything. Do not attempt to guess his will for you. Do not assume that you are right because an answer seems to come from him. Be sure you ask, and then be still and let him speak. There is no problem he cannot resolve, for it is never he who keeps apart some questions to be solved by someone else. You cannot share the world with him and make half of it while his while half belongs to you. Oh, okay. You cannot share the world with him and make half of it his while half belongs to you. Truth makes no compromise. To keep apart a little is to keep all separate. Your life, complete and whole, belongs to God, or none of it is his. There is no thought in all the world that seems more terrible. Yet it is only when this thought appears in perfect clarity that there is hope and peace and safety for the mind so long kept dark and twisted to avoid the light. This is the light. Step back and do not dwell upon the forms that seem to keep you bound. You will fulfill your function and will have whatever you will need. God does not fail, but lay no limits on what you would give to him to be resolved. For he cannot offer 1,000 answers when but one is all there is. Accept this one of him, and not one question will remain to ask. Do not forget, if you attempt to solve a problem, you have judged it for yourself, and so you have betrayed your proper role. You
Yep.
know, I think we should reread this next week.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just trusting our own intentions is fraught with peril, as they say, because our minds are still split, and so part of our motivation is sabotage, and the other part is actually genuinely wanting to heal and to restore the peace that was never left, right?
exactly.
Yeah. I
Exactly.
think that's was spelled out very nicely in that paragraph. But well, half of us is sane, or it's not mathematical proportion. It's just let's just say a significant part, which can be generous at times, right? Yeah. All righty.
Exactly.
Well, thank
Exactly.
you so much, Lynn. I always enjoy our conversations together on Saturday mornings, and look forward to picking up where we left off next week.
Absolutely. Me too, Bruce. And thank
Yeah.
you so much. And have a great class today. And we're going to have a class also. So